Hello, and thanks for tuning in. You're listening to the Scott Johnson Radio Show on the Building Fortunes Radio and the Humongous Radio Network. Thanks again for listening in. The Scott Johnson Radio Show is featured on Building Fortunes Radio with co-host Peter Mingils and the distinguished host Scott Johnson. We are here broadcasting worldwide, online, to help make the world become a better place. Scott Johnson is famously known for his Stop The Amway Tool scam efforts, identifying the deceptive business practices of many Amway uplines. From hidden tool profits to lack of retail sales to non-distributors, the Scott Johnson Radio Show explores what's good and bad in the MLM industry. Scott welcomed guests and feedback from just about everyone in the MLM industry, with one absolute definite exception: the lying, social manipulating, YouTube begging, now denying, self-proclaimed previous drug seller, infamous anti-MLM troll, Marco Mokhyber, besides being sued by several MLM companies, including Primerica, always stupid Marco, is the one person who won't be on the Scott Johnson Radio Show. Everyone else, come on and join Scott and Peter for an informative and entertaining conversation about the world of MLM. You'll be able to hear the Scott Johnson Radio Show on the Humongous AM and Humongous FM radio network and on all major platforms, such as Amazon's Audible and Apple Podcasts, Spotify and iHeartRadio, and many of your other favorite podcasts. Share this show with the people that are important to you, and let us help you make a difference in your world. Now on to the Scott Johnson Radio Show. Take it away, Peter.
Hello, everyone. Peter Mingils here. You are listening to the Scott Johnson Radio Show on the Building Fortunes Radio Network. My name is Peter Mingils. I hope you like that introduction. For those people that are wondering, Scott Johnson and I have been doing this radio show for, it's going to be almost, 11 years, I think. We started around Labor Day of 2015, and I think this Labor Day is September 7th. I think I was looking it up for 2026, but we started in late August, first week of September, way back when, as a result of a couple of radio shows I did with Roger Van Vlissingen, who is a gentleman who is a really good guy, super smart, was writing for Seeking Alpha, which is an online publication talking about publicly traded companies. He was talking about Herbalife, and even though Vima wasn't a publicly traded company, he was talking about Vima and the MLM business model, and it was really good. And Scott Johnson called me up and he said, Peter, there's something a lot of people are missing. I did not know who Scott Johnson was before. It was the first time he called me. And I said, what's that, Scott? And he said, the tool scam. And I said, the tool scam. And then I said to myself, I wonder if he's thinking about Amway, because I know that I had some questions and a beef, if you will. I quit Amway 3 separate times because of them making a profit on the books, tapes, and functions without really exposing or, explaining that, hey, most of our income is coming from that. They were leading people to believe that their income was coming from Amway. Meanwhile, it was really coming from the system or the tool scam that Scott was referencing. So when I asked the question, do you have a website? He said, yes, he does. And he still has, stoptheamwaytoolscam.wordpress.com. But that sparked a conversation that has led to almost now 11 years of weekly publications. We do this every Saturday night, 8:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 on the Central Side. And unless there's a holiday or a wedding or something else that might be going on, a technical challenge, we're here almost all the time, one of our most consistent radio shows. And I find this fascinating because severalfold. Number one, I always learn a lot from Scott. Number two is, as a result of doing this radio show, I kind of have to keep up with what's going on with the industry and some other, parallel kind of examples of what's going on in the industry. And sometimes we have a guest, sometimes we do this ourselves, but it's always educational. For anybody that listens to any or all or many or all of these, you won't be surprised if you get scammed. If you get scammed, we probably would have covered it one way or another, maybe with a different company or a different name or a different example, but more than less likely, we cover just about everything there is to get covered, everything from the MLM companies to the distributors to the gurus. And some of my favorites I have to share with you are going against the anti-MLM trolls. And one in particular, Marco Mokhyber, So Always Stupid Marco, or the handle Always Marco, is one of our favorites because, number one, he's a guy, and it's better to pick on a guy than pick on a girl. So number one, I'm a little chauvinist in that respect, so I'm not going to pick on a girl. Number two is he is worthy of being picked on. So number three, we didn't pick the fight. We're just finishing it all the time. We're just finishing it. And as a result of that, you can see a lot of really cool things on the Internet as a result of some of the stuff that Always Marco Muka Bear has done. So check him out, Marco Muka Bear. And I think we're going to reference him a couple of times today. But we won't dwell on him because he's not worth dwelling on. Scott Johnson, thanks for being here on your own radio show.
Hey, Peter, thanks for having me. I love that introduction. You mentioned the tool scam, and let me, for the new listeners, kind of explain some background there. So what the tools are things like meetings. You buy a ticket for a meeting, and there's profit from that. You buy books. You buy a phone app. You buy recordings, voicemail, website access. There's all these different platforms, if you will, that the upline sells to the downline, and they do make tremendous profit from it. My go-to guy is a guy by the name of Brig Hart, because the multiplier is the largest that I've come across. Not that that's the largest ever, but that's the largest one that's well documented. And if you Google his name, and it's Brighart, 4 letters in each name, and the words Salt Lake City, because he gave an interview to a Salt Lake City media outlet back in the early 2000s. And in that article, read it for yourself. Don't believe me. Go look it up and read it for yourself, because it's the publication's information. It's not my information. It's what he told them, and then they published it. So, it doesn't get much, more solid information than that. But in that interview, I guess you could call it, he said, I was making almost $1 million a year before I got kicked out of Amway, and I was also making $8 to $10 million a year from the tools. And to your point earlier, because I don't have a problem with people making money. That's not the issue. But what they do is they don't mention that that's where they make most of their money until they get kicked out. And then some of them start talking, and I have gathered up all that I could find over the years as far as examples. And Brig Hart is not an outlier. There's other people that have had, smaller multipliers, anywhere from, twice as much or several times or 4 to 5 times. Those are all terms that other people have used when they're talking about how much money they used to make from tools when they were in Amway. But even at the lowest one, at a multiplier of 2, you think about that. Okay, you make it twice as much from tools as Amway. That's 2/3, right? You're making 2/3 of your income that you're not telling people about. And I view that as a lie of omission. And I think it's RICO fraud, RICO. You can look up the history of that if you like. It's very interesting. And also the guy behind writing the law and his ties to an Amway lawsuit years ago. I won't go down that rabbit trail tonight. But anyway, that's the tool scam. It's this hidden profit that they don't talk about. And so when you go to any meeting or any discussion you have with the upline, it's all about Amway. They don't talk at all about the massive amounts of money being brought in by the tools. And so that's why I refer to it as the Amway tool scam, because that's what it is. And so that's number one as far as the 2 big problems in MLMs. And a lot of MLMs don't have tool scams. Amway does, Herbalife does. I'm sure there's others. It's kind of hard to track because it's kind of fuzzy information. By nature, you would expect it to be fuzzy because it's stuff they don't want to talk about. So you have to really dig in and find people squealing like Brig Hart did years ago to find anything meaningful. Now, I have sort of reverse engineered it. I took, things like the meeting ticket prices and the prices for the recordings and the books, and I could sort of back calculate the amount of profit, and of course this all goes to the very top levels, right? Unlike in Amway or any other MLM where everybody up and down the chain gets paid, and the higher you are and the more volume that you're directly and indirectly responsible for, the more money you make, which only makes sense. Just like any non-MLM company, the higher up you are, generally the more money you make because you have more responsibility, for both good and bad behaviors in not only yourself but your entire organization. So that's really not the issue. But anyway, the other big problem is the lack of retail sales. And let me define that, because I know that the DSA, the Direct Selling Association, not the Democrat Socialists of America, they're kind of taking over that abbreviation, by the way, but the Direct Selling Association refers to the total revenue of MLMs as retail sales. You can go to their website, and you can see that. I think it's around $34 billion in a recent year in the United States. Excuse me. And they tout it as retail sales. But what that really is total revenue. And in most MLMs, most of the products or services that I'm aware of were being purchased by the distributors, not customers. Customer being defined as somebody who's not a distributor, an MLM distributor. They have no interest in the company as a business. They have as much interest in the company as they do if they went to Walmart or some other store and bought something. That's really a very distinct difference between a customer and a distributor, because the distributor is trying to make money, right? They're trying to sell products ostensibly to customers. They're trying to build an organization, a downline, and they benefit from the downline purchases as well. And so it's a completely different, mental approach to how the business operates and how they interact with it. So the issue with MLMs is generally the products are expensive. If you go out and compare them to similar products on the market, you'll find, 2, 3, sometimes more times expensive going through an MLM than going through whether it's a, online or brick and mortar store. And so a customer, when they look at that, they say, well, that's really expensive. And usually the answer is no. Now, they might be a close friend or relative. They might like you. They might want to support you in your business. And so they might buy some stuff, at least temporarily. There's not too many long-term customers because they experience the products and they go, well, this is pretty much average stuff, and it's really not worth the extra money, that you're charging. And so I like you, but not that much. In fact, we had a guest on the show whose family supported her, and they bought the products for a month or two, but then they said, no, that's about the end of it. So it's not just getting customers, it's getting new ones. That's a constant effort, just like it's a constant effort to get new distributors, because they drop out so quickly, if they ever did anything in the first place, by the way. So what the lack of retail sales is actually an illegal pyramid. You see these people throwing around the P word, pyramid, all the time, and if you ever ask them, well, what does that mean exactly? They couldn't tell you. They generally, the default that I've heard is something like, well, if you get a job, you don't have to recruit anybody. It's like, okay, that's true. In most non-MLM jobs, that's true. But just because it's different doesn't mean it's wrong, or it doesn't mean it's illegal either. And so to me, that whole argument falls flat, because just because it's different, it really doesn't mean anything as far as being unethical, immoral, illegal, all of those things. However, when there's little to no retail sales to customers, that is an illegal pyramid. And I know we've covered this in recent weeks. There was a company out there called Bint, B-I-N-T. It stood for Blessings in No Time. And it was a gifting scheme where you put up some money, and then if you can get enough people under you to put up the money, eventually when you have enough people under you, you can cash out for a big chunk of money, and that's how a gifting scheme works. You can Google that term, gifting scheme. You can Google BINT, because these two people that ran it they just been sentenced to 40 years each in federal court or in federal prison, which means they're going to serve most of that time. This is not a state prison where maybe you'll spend a third or a fourth of the sentence. They're going to spend most of it. They might get a couple years off for good behavior, but they're going to be in there for a solid 35, 37 plus years. That's just the way the federal system works. So the parallel between that situation where there's no products, right, you're just paying money in, and an MLM is where you buy a product, and I like to use an example. Let's say it's a bottle of shampoo that costs $20 at a store, and the MLM charges $40. That's pretty typical. Then really that first $20, there's nothing wrong with it. It's what you would have spent at a store. But the second $20 is just like the gifting scheme. You're putting money in, not getting value back, and when you have enough people under you doing that, you can make a lot of money. And that's how most MLMs work, if not all of them. I've always been open to, if someone can bring me a documented example of an MLM doing it right, I'm open to it. I'm not one of these people that is so vehemently anti-MLM that I don't care about the facts. So if someone's got a good example and it's something that can be audited and, I can ask questions and so forth, then I'm willing to talk about an exception. So anyway, what the next logical question would be, well, how many retail sales is enough, right? That's a very natural progression of that sort of logic. Well, the FTC settled with two companies, coincidentally both in 2016, called Vima and Herbalife. And in both cases, and I'll simplify but only slightly, if at least 50% of the products were being sold to customers versus the distributors purchasing them, then the FTC was okay with that. And in fact, the companies were okay with that because they also signed off on the settlement. That's what settlements are. Both sides make compromises, and that was one of the compromises that both sides made. They said, hey, if we have at least 50%, we're good. And unfortunately, the FTC has not brought that forward as kind of a generic guideline to the industry. I think a lot of MLMs have kind of believed that if they do that, they'll be in less trouble, and they're probably right. That the FTC would probably go after companies that have less retail sales than more, unless there's other issues, of course. So I think that's, it all kind of flows together, but there's no real good concrete rules or guidelines or laws or anything like that. But I think that's a good sort of guideline to follow, is to have a minimum of 50%, and you're probably going to be in pretty good shape as far as an illegal pyramid perspective, even though the FTC doesn't know what an illegal pyramid is either. If you go to their website, ftc.gov, and start reading about pyramids, you'll get a bunch of word salad, and even someone like me that's familiar with this industry, I just go away scratching my head going, what did I just read? Let alone someone that's brand new to the industry. If they happened to bump into the FTC website, because most people, are not aware of the FTC, and those that are, many of them don't even know what their responsibilities are. And so the audience that the FTC has looking at their website is very small, and it's very ineffective to put information out there, particularly information that just sort of runs all over the place and it doesn't really help people make a decision. Then, what good is it? And so anyway, I'll stop there, Peter, because I can go on and on with this. But that's the two things. Lack of retail sales equals illegal pyramid, and tool scams equals RICO fraud, or at least business fraud, right? Because if you're not describing the business model accurately, then it's fraud. I don't see any way around that, because you're basically just lying by omission and telling people what you want them to hear, but not telling them what you don't want them to hear. And that's really the essence of, a RICO fraud and a business fraud. So anyway, I'll take any comments and we can move on.
Nope, we're good to go. So for those people that are unfamiliar with the terms, like I think about it sometimes, when I was growing up in direct sales, I would sometimes interview people. So for those people unfamiliar with my background, when I graduated from college, I didn't become a doctor. I decided that I needed to make money, and I went on a job interview, had a really great job interview with someone who was really just a fantastic interview person. He presented the opportunity the way where it made sense that I took a chance at it, and I didn't know it was selling vacuums or a management training program. But he says, listen, if you're going to run one of our offices, which is what he gave me the opportunity to do, you'll earn 50% of the profits and you won't have to pay for it. And I thought that was a good opportunity. No one was knocking on my door saying, hey, we'll give you the opportunity to have the keys to an office. We'll give you the inventory. We'll set up everything for you. And the only thing we'll ask is that we'll split the profits for you. So I wasn't sophisticated enough to really analyze how they calculated the profits. I just figured that, okay, I'll do it. And that was direct sales. And in direct sales with Electrolux, we literally, I guess, could have sold to our parents and our aunts and our uncles, but there weren't enough of them to really sustain a career. Eventually, I have to go out there and sell a product to total strangers, meaning people that didn't know who I was when they first met me. And I learned that direct selling was a lot of selling to people that don't know who you are initially. And then you make friends and you get referrals and all that sort of stuff. Network marketing by design is you market to your own network. So you're marketing to people that you know. So that kind of makes sense. That's why they call it network marketing. So therefore you'd probably have internal consumption and consumption from a lot of your friends, and a lot of your friends might want to do it too. So there would be a lot less total strangers being marketed to, a lot more, friends, neighbors, and relatives. However, the FTC says, okay, we get it. You'll probably be pretty top-heavy on, internal combustion or internal consumption and lots of your friends and not a whole bunch of outside retail customers. But, and then they give you a little bit of slack. They say, if you just show us a sign, if you show us that there are retail customers, and like Scott, to your frustration and to a lot of people's frustration, they never tell you the number. What, is it 10%? Is it 20%? Is it 50%? Is it 51%? We know in special cases it's usually over 50%, but they never give us the number. But for those people that are kind of wondering what's a difference between direct selling and network marketing, in network marketing you're marketing to a network, which is totally okay. Who else would you market to? Guess what? My mom eventually bought a vacuum. My aunt eventually bought a shampooer. Some of my other family members eventually bought products because they were good, but those weren't my only customers. So Scott, this kind of adds a little cherry on the cake that you were talking about, some of the things about retail customers and how this stuff works. And for some of the newer people listening in, the network marketing industry is rather unique because it is a lot of referral marketing, a lot of word of mouth, a lot of referrals, a lot of friends, neighbors, relatives, and that's both good and sometimes problematic as well. So back to you, Scott.
Yeah, because what happens sometimes is the relationship between the friends and family kind of goes sideways, particularly if you're pushy. My particular upline, pretty much said, if they say no, just take it as a no and move on to the next person. Don't try to bug them and get them to change their mind, because the more you try to do that, the more they're going to dig their feet in, and it's just not productive. So yeah, you do go after your friends and relatives at least until you run out of them, and then you do go to strangers, and that's the way my upline talked about it, was that your friends and relatives are practice, and if they say no, then you go out and find a bunch of people you don't know, and then your friends and relatives will come back around when they see your success. That's kind of how it was described to us as far as how to approach all of that. But you're right, with And really, I want to make another point too, because you brought up direct selling, which is fundamentally different than MLM, because in direct selling, there's no upline or downline. You don't build a group. Now, you as an office manager, in an Electrolux shop or store, whatever you call it, you're going to hire some salespeople to go out and make sales, and you're going to benefit from a percentage of their sales because you train them. But it's not like all of the salespeople are looking for other salespeople. The salespeople are looking for customers. And if they're really good at it, I assume that they could then eventually get their own store in their own territory. And like you did, Peter, you built up to 80 or 90 stores of territory that covered several states.
Yeah, 96 different offices, yep.
Yeah, so that opportunity is available to anybody in a direct selling mode. But again, the major focus is making those retail sales to customers, and there's not this focus on I got to go build an organization. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with a friend or relative buying an MLM product and being counted as a customer. Some people say, these crazy anti-MLMers, well, a friend or a relative doesn't really count as a retail sale, if they're a customer and not a distributor. And to me, that's just a stupid thing because, okay, well, where do you draw the line? Is it like the first cousin, the second cousin? Is it a friend that you've known for at least 5 years? Someone that you spend more than an hour a week with on average? I mean, where do you slice and dice this thing up to determine, whether they're a close enough friend or relative to count versus not count? Do they live a certain number of miles away? You can go all down these different rabbit trails and just totally confuse yourself. So, it doesn't matter to me if they're a friend or relative as a customer. If they buy it, they buy it. And certainly there might be some inclination on those people's part to buy it more than a stranger. Sometimes it works the other way too. But again, trying to define these kinds of terms and sort of have these subsets of friends and relatives and customers and non-customers, it's just silly to me. So anyway, by the way, you just reminded me too. I saw something, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and it was an article about some MLMs in Vietnam, and they were in trouble with Vietnam, and apparently Vietnam has a law, an actual law that has a minimum of 25% retail sales. So that I found that to be interesting. It's certainly, smaller than 50%, and but it's a law. It's not like this is a suggestion, or this is a like the FTC would do, and the FTC has done. Yeah, well, this applied to Veeam and Herbalife, but we're not going to apply this to everybody because every situation's different, and gobbledygook after gobbledygook from the FTC. But in Vietnam, it's a minimum 25%, which I think is much lower than it should be. And in fact, I think 50% is lower than it should be. But I'm willing to accept that as a minimum because, again, the products are expensive, and it's really hard to sell overpriced products, especially on a large scale. Right? If you have a small group of talented salespeople, you can probably pull it off, because they learn the sales skills. They have, either a good natural personality, or they learned, the things that are important to become a better salesperson. But even at 25%, I would be willing to accept that, by the way, because I really believe that it's that hard to sell on a large scale overpriced products, expensive products, because most people don't know people that are wealthy, because people that are wealthy are the people that buy some of the overpriced brands, out there. I'm talking about the non-MLM stuff, luxury cars, the luxury makeup, the luxury whatever, because that stuff is sold. It's just sold to a very small percentage of the population. People typically that have more money than they have sense, and that's perfectly fine. If you're a luxury brand, you want to sell to that market, great. But that doesn't mean you can do it in an MLM, because you're not going to find wealthy people generally interested in joining an MLM and selling products. That's just not their orientation. So anyway, yeah, that was something I came across that I found interesting. In fact, I think that's the only country that actually has a percentage of retail sales. I've come across no other country, including the United States, that has a law, let alone a guideline, but a law that defines the minimum. I found that very interesting. So there you go. That's some of the things that we learned just checking things out during the week. Anything more on that?
Nope, we're good. And I'm going to just tell you, Scott, I'm waiting on a phone call real quick. I just found out. So if I tell you, hold on, I'll be back, you just carry on. I'll be right back, okay?
Yeah, no problem. No problem. I do want to get into another thing that I discovered this past week or so. And I know we've talked about this before, Peter, but I found out just a little nuance to this, which turns out to be not just a little nuance. It's pretty important. And this is an Amway rule. So the way Amway used to work was there was 2 rules when you leave. There was a 6-month rule and a 2-year rule. The 6-month rule was if you leave Amway, you can't join another MLM that has products that compete with Amway's. Now, Amway has pretty much everything. So that kind of whittles it down to real estate or insurance. Other than that, you'd be hard-pressed to find an MLM that would not compete with Amway as far as a product type. The other rule was a 2-year rule. The 2-year rule said that for 2 years after you leave the MLM, you cannot approach a current Amway distributor. They call them IBOs now, independent business owners. And so that was the rules. More recently, they've gotten rid of the 6-month rule, and they've shortened the 2-year rule to a 1-year rule. However, there's a really important caveat, and I don't know if this was how it was set up originally, like 3 or 4 years ago, or if it's more recent. I haven't dug into it. But the current rule, the 1-year rule, is when you join another MLM that competes in products, that you cannot recruit anyone else that was in Amway within the previous 1 year. And I think the reason they did that was because, when some of these big pins leave, they go on their social media and they say, yeah, I got terminated and Amway sucks and blah, blah, blah. And they never really have to try to attract their downline, because their downline, by and large, worships them anyway. And so when they leave and go to another MLM, the downline just follows them. They don't have to be invited. And so they never have to contact the downline, because the downline contacts them. With the new rule, it doesn't matter who takes the initiative. If the downline takes the initiative, it's still not allowed, because now it's not the former upline contacting the downline. It's we're both sides in Amway within the previous year. In fact, the way the rule reads is you could contact somebody after you leave Amway. You have no idea if they were in Amway previously, and if they get in your business in another MLM, then Amway can go after you, even though you have no idea they were in Amway. I think the reason Amway did that was because of what I just described, was you didn't have to approach your downline. They approached you, your former downline. They approached you. And so Amway kind of closed that loop and said, we don't care who approached who. If either one of you was in Amway in the previous year, you can't join up in that MLM. And I found that to be really interesting, because the other way was hard to prove. This is easy to prove. If Amway finds out, that you left Amway, you went to a different MLM, and then someone under you joined. If they find out who it is, they can search their own records, Amway's own records, and see that, oh, that person used to be in Amway. Even though it was a totally different line of sponsorship. You were perfect strangers to each other before, they joined the new MLM. They can go after you now.
Hey, Scott,
and we
Peter's
can go
here.
After you.
Hey, I'm helping a customer who's in a little bit of a challenge, so I'll be right back, okay?
Yeah, I'll just continue on. No problem, Peter. So anyway, that was something really interesting when I read that rule, and I started thinking about the details and how they've modified it to make sure that, when I say they, I mean Amway corporate, they could have an auditable trail where they could ensure that you followed this rule, and you could easily break the rule, no fault of your own. You just didn't know. In fact, it really puts the onus on you after you leave Amway that you need to ask that person, have they left Amway within the previous year? Because if they have, by rule, they cannot join you in your MLM. So now there is a little bit of a challenge in finding out if someone left Amway and they joined another MLM and they joined under, another, former Amway person. That could be a little bit of a challenge to research and nail down. But it's a lot more defined than it used to be, put it that way. So anyway, Peter, I'm going to assume you're still gone, and I'll just move on to a new story that we talked about a little bit prior to the show, and that involves our favorite anti-MLMer, Always Marco. He goes by Always Marco on YouTube, and our term for him is Always Stupid Marco, Muchagoon, the lying shyster, and there's words behind each one of those words, and let me explain that real quick, just to take up a little bit of time. Plus, I enjoy doing this. So he goes by Always Marco, and so we put the term stupid in there, and you're going to get another example of this week on how stupid Marco really is. Now, he's been sued by several MLMs for making stupid comments on YouTube and probably other social media, and he's tens of thousands of dollars in debt to them. He's got no job, no way of repaying them. He also has a default judgment from a company called Market America, an MLM, and he decided after these previous lawsuits that he's had that this newest lawsuit he would ignore, which is stupid, right? He's already been sued by other companies. He gets sued by another one and decides to ignore it. Well, now there's a default judgment of $800,000 hanging over his head, and I'm sure interest is accruing daily. So it's probably going to be well over $1 million by the time he, tries to figure out what he's going to do about it and realizes he can't. So anyway, that's the Always Stupid Marco. And as Peter mentioned earlier, his last name is Mukaber or something. I don't even know how you pronounce it. But we take liberty with Mukaber, and we say Mooch a goon because he calls his followers goons, or at least he used to, until goon brought on a new meaning to it, gooning, and people can look that up too. Anyway, Mooch a goon, and then the lying part, he lied about all kinds of stuff. But my favorite one, because I think it's the most important, is he made a video one time basically bragging about being a cocaine dealer. And he was proud of it. He put it out there. It was up there for, I don't know, a year or two. And then eventually he took it down. But then he also did a show where he brought on a guest who I was able to talk to before he did the show. So I was able to give them some background information about Marco, particularly his cocaine selling days. And he brought it up during the show. He says, well, wait a second, Marco, because Marco was basically criticizing him about the MLM that he was in and how they used plastic bags to hold the powders in and so forth. And so very adroitly, the guest said, well, Marco, you used to sell stuff in little bags too, didn't you? And I think he asked him at least 3 times. You back? So I think he asked him at least 3 times. He said, at least on a small scale, right, Marco? I mean, come on. I've seen the video, Marco. I saw your video. And so even a small-time cocaine dealer. And Marco just kept denying it, which shows him to be a proven liar. I mean, that's just, and he's just a shyster too, because, he's shysted all kinds of people. And the most recent one, just a few days ago, he made a video, and if you want to find it, it's on the Always Marco channel, and just look for Marco with a really big fat head. He sort of blew himself up with AI, and the program that he made was basically centered around 10 fat people. It was kind of one of these, what do you call, survivor-type theme stories, but it was all fat people. And when they brought him in one at a time, the guy, emceeing the show gave him a big pizza to eat. So anyway, that's the brainiac level of what Marco entertains his audience with. And by the way, the brainiac level of his own audience watches that kind of crap. So anyway, before he got on to the show part of it, he's kind of reminiscing a little bit, where he took his niece to a festival, a fair, up there in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And he said, yeah, I haven't been to this thing. It used to be called Klondike Days, and now it's just K Days. And it's like a 10-day festival where you go in and, there's rides and there's, I guess, booths and food and all kinds of stuff. Just your typical fair type of a situation. And he says, yeah, and he's 30 years old now. He'll be 31 on March 15th. He likes to talk about that, the Ides of March. He doesn't talk about that part. He just likes to remind people he was born on March 15th. So he'll be 31 here in a few months. Anyway, when he was there, when he was like 18 or 19 years old, what he did was he waited outside, and when someone came out, and they had those little wristbands that you wear, like in a hospital, or I guess a lot of fairs nowadays do that too. They have like a sticky thing where, you sort of put the wristband around your wrist and you stick it. It's so difficult to remove. I would say it's difficult to remove and not notice, that it was removed and reused. But I guess Marco figured out a way of doing that. And so what he did was he took the wristband from a guy leaving who paid $100 for it, for the whole day, and he paid him $20. And so the guy got $20 of his $100 back. Marco got $20 and the wristband to be able to go back into the festival and pay only 1/5 of the normal price. And he describes this on his video. So he's basically modeling this for, his goons, the people that follow him, and, give them really good ideas on how to act right. And so he's walking into the fair just a week or so ago, I guess, with his niece now, with his young niece. And as they're walking in, this guy says, hey, you want a free ticket to Marco? And he goes, sure. Now, the tickets now are only $25. But the reason for that is because you buy the tickets for the rides separately. And so $25 gets you into the event. And then if you want to go on rides, you buy the number of tickets accordingly for the number of rides you want to ride. Because I can understand that. A lot of people just want to walk around. They don't have an interest in the ride. So, it's kind of a good business move to have people come in and enjoy everything else besides the rides. And then you can just pay for the rides on top of that. So he goes up to the window, ticket in hand, and he's reading the information. Oh, kids get in free. And he asked the person, behind the window, well, what age kids qualify for, for this, free ticket for entry. And she said 6 and under. And his response was, perfect, with his niece standing right next to him. Now, I don't think that the person behind the window believed that an 11-year-old was 6 years old, but she was also probably a little embarrassed to challenge him. And so she let his niece in when she was nowhere near 6 years old. But that's just a shyster in Marco. He's always looking for some kind of an angle, some kind of a way to cheat the system. And he talks, again, in this video, and please don't listen to the whole 4 hours plus. If you go, I think it starts around minute 25 through 32 is where this whole discussion is. But then he tries to explain how, doing all the stuff that he does, like sneaking into a movie theater and not buying a ticket, it really isn't that big of a deal because the chair is there. It's not being sat in. They're not going to do anything extra. When they're showing the movie, it's going to be watched by the people in the other seats, and he's just occupying another seat that wasn't going to be occupied anyway. And so it's really not a big deal to just go into a movie theater, as another example, and watch the movie. And the level of dishonesty in this guy is appalling. Now, I make that point to also bring this up, that Marco was born in Canada, but his family moved to Canada before he was born from Lebanon. He's Lebanese. And so they brought that culture into Canada, just like a bunch of foreigners bring their cultures into Canada and the United States and so forth. And so he's talked in past videos about how this whole shyster thing is just part of the culture in Lebanon. That's just how people are. They're always looking to take advantage of each other. That's just part of their culture. And so, he was raised that way. He still operates that way. And now his young niece, it's being passed down is what I'm saying here. And so she sees this as normal also. And so that, and here's another thing that he's done over the years. He's complained about all the foreigners coming into Canada. And there's a lot of foreigners going into Canada. Now they're ruining things. And he has like zero self-awareness. He doesn't understand that even though he was born in Canada physically, he's got a Lebanese culture. It's a shyster culture by his own admission. And he's really complaining about himself, but he doesn't know it. He doesn't know that he's really complaining about himself because he's really complaining about the behaviors of his own heritage that he's passing down now to the next generation and to all the people watching him on YouTube. And it's just amazing to me the lack of self-awareness and the dishonesty that's just ingrained in him, and he sees no wrong with it. I mean, this is perfectly acceptable. He explains it away, like I just said on the video. And Peter, it's just amazing to me how different of an orientation he has to all of this. And he also complained about because he was I guess waiting for his niece. She had to go to the bathroom a little bit later in the day, and they were trying to decide whether to stay or to go. And a woman made a comment to him. I think he asked her, as far as what goes on, that people can enter late in the day and not have to pay to get in. And she says, "Oh yeah, this is the lady that he just met at the fair." She says, "Oh yeah, all the hoodlums come in." The teenagers, and they just walk around and, give the place a whole different environment, a whole different feel. And then he actually bumped into some of these people, not personally, but he observed them and how they, wore their jeans low. And he had never seen that when he was growing up, which is only like 15 years ago, right? He's 30 years old. So apparently he was brought up in a relatively, middle upper class neighborhood and surroundings, because this kind of, sort of, just grungy look has been around for at least 20, 25 years, I would say. And it's just funny how sort of protected he is, and yet he's got this culture of, hey, I don't care if I rip off somebody or some company, they're not going to miss it. I don't see any problem with it. So anyway, I'll stop right there, Peter. But that's Marco's latest that people can go watch for themselves and see what kind of a shyster that he is, and his whole attitude and how he is now influencing other people to act this way. So anyway, I'll let you add whatever you'd like.
We have basically underlined his name, Always Stupid Marco, because I don't think he really realizes, like other people watch the internet, and maybe future sponsors of his radio show or his podcast might watch the internet, and maybe future employers or future boyfriends or maybe even future girlfriends, a little stretch over there. So who knows what is going on. But the reality is that Marco actually admits to misdemeanors and minor criminal charges on a regular basis. And for any of his, and then in another breath, he's like, well, why don't you buy my time, or buy my advice, or buy some of my products on whatever new website he's got, .vip. And it's tone deaf, number one. Number two, his Goonies, and for those people that are unfamiliar with the internet term to be called a goon online, I'll say it, Scott, you wouldn't. You have much more class than I do. It's for people who jerk off watching videos. So it's perfect for Marco's goons to be called his Goonies. So the idea that Marco sits there online and says the things that he does with being oblivious to the way that he does his business parallels and his other things is just baffling, to the point where one of the statements you said, Scott, a little bit earlier, like you don't have to watch the whole 4 hours. Just watch the 20 minutes and you'll get enough. And you probably just have to watch the 20 minutes maybe once a quarter just to realize that you're wasting your time when you're watching Always Stupid Marco. So you'll check him out. If you go look up his name, Marco Mukabear, you'll see what we're talking about. He's got some fans that write some things about him as well. And I know that on Building Fortunes Radio, if you go to the deep dives, you'll be able to hear some of the deep dives as far as the reviews about some of his legal cases. But he is a really wonderful example of how really stupid some people are. So it's fascinating. And to take business advice from somebody that thinks that businesses work the way that he does is just absolutely primitive. I mean, it's just crazy. Anyway, that's it, Scott. And there's probably a reason why I got to throw these names in there. Primerica has sued him, and Market America has sued him, and even companies that have questionable nature, IM Academy, they have sued him as well. And some of them have won. He's got some pretty decent law bills and, what we might say, judgments against him that he's paying off. So I don't know, Scott. The guy is just, it's perfect because we get a chance to witness the demise of Always Marco. Is his static, his basically his channel hasn't moved, and he got no kind of a bump by having been a guest on Matt Cox, and no bumps anywhere else. And it's kind of interesting that he has us still stuck in his head most of the time. And we may talk about him often, but trust me, Scott, he's not stuck in my head, if you know what I mean. So back to you.
Yeah, he's just entertainment for us. I mean,
yep.
Not only did he not get a bump from Matt Cox, but Matt Cox actually criticized him. I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, and Marco actually played that on his own live show on YouTube at the time. I mean, the depth of stupidity is just it's overwhelming.
Kind of crazy.
It really is.
I got to just point this out, just in case anybody listens to it. When he was on Matt Cox, he was talking about how his funding has been really stripped down because of all these lawsuits. So he lost his YouTube money and the Patreon and a couple other things. They're going after his income. And then Matt says, well, I'll do everything I possibly can to help you. So I'll list all of the places where people can send you money. So for all those, attorneys or people that act like attorneys that are trying to go after Marco, just fast forward to the end, and or just look in the show notes of Matt Cox's interview with Marco, because there's where his money's going. So if you need his money, that's where you go get him. And that's what I mean, Scott. It's just crazy, stupid. And I usually respect the videos that Matt Cox does, so I won't hold this one against him. But we did predict it right. It's one of the shortest videos and one of the least watched videos ever for Matt Cox, probably since he's run that channel. So very interesting. But let's move on to somebody else or something else other than Marco.
Yeah, and by the way, some of the commenters really slammed Marco on that Matt Cox video too.
I'm sure
it goes all the way. It goes all the way around.
Yep.
So yeah, let's move on. So let's go to behindmlm.com. There's a couple of things there that were of interest in this past week, and I encourage anyone to go there because it's a really good site, because these guys do a great job of finding and tracking different stories, whether it's an MLM, a person, that was in an MLM and so forth. I do have to caution people, though, that there's a lot of stories, and we don't cover nearly all of them. And the main reason is because most of these stories are crypto/MLM related, and all it changes is the names of the people and the companies, but it's pretty much the same story over and over again. These are often very short-lived companies, and some of it's by design, where these guys will go in, make a bunch of money, and before any regulators or law enforcement even are aware of them, they'll shut it down and start up another one. And so they're not easy to find, from a law enforcement regulator perspective, let alone prosecute, because they're here and gone. And how do you put together a case? It's not easy. So they're pretty smart in that respect. If you're going to be a smart scammer, don't do like Marco, do like these guys do. So anyway, the first one I came across here, and I like to highlight these when there's actually results, right? When there's actual things that occurred and some you can chalk up as far as a victory. So this one is dated July 28th, 2026, and the headline is Hyperfund's Rodney Burton sentenced to 32 months. And I don't think I even read this story, but I think we may have covered this MLM a little bit in the past. But the main thing here is, to be aware that there is some law enforcement. I don't think there's enough, but there is some law enforcement regulation, and sometimes these guys get caught. But don't believe that just because one guy got caught that cleaned up the whole industry, because it didn't. It's just that maybe he was a little bit more blatant, maybe he was a little bit more obvious, maybe people that came to the authorities had more information, all those kinds of things influence on who they go after. But anyway, I just chalked this up as a victory, as opposed to the next one. I'll let you make any comments on this one, Peter.
No, I don't know that much about Hyperverse or Hyperfund. There was a whole bunch of Hyper somethings a while back, and they were all kind of like spin-offs of the other one. So I'm glad finally this guy stopped, because I'm pretty sure he was involved in a lot of things. But I didn't focus that much on the Hyper stuff, because like you said, Scott, you just look at it, you realize it's a scam. If people can't figure out that it's a scam right away, they're probably not going to ever figure out that it's a scam. So I didn't really research that one too much.
Yeah, I think it was just like one more. But this is one more that got caught. So, that's the significance of it. And so, hopefully others will see this and say, ooh, maybe I shouldn't do what I'm doing. Maybe it'll change some minds and deter some people from doing some of these things. I think that's really the benefit that even goes beyond punishing him individually, is other people will sit up and take notice and go, yeah, I don't think I'm going to go do that now because I don't really want to spend 32 months in prison. And I'm pretty sure this was a federal case too, so it'll be most of that time. It says he was in the custody of U.S. Marshals, so pretty sure this was a federal case, which means you're going to spend most of your sentence in prison, not, like a typical state prison. You might serve a third or a fourth of it. That's what's typical in most states, I think. So anyway, so here's the kind of a conundrum. It's the next story down. It's also dated July 28th, 2026, and the headline is DOJ drops BitClub network indictment against Goetsch. I don't know how you pronounce his name, Goettsche. And let me just read sort of the first paragraph here. And this is behind MLM, the author writing it. It says, "It brings me no pleasure to report that for the first time in 16 years since I started behind MLM, the U.S. Department of Justice has dropped criminal charges related to MLM fraud." Now, I don't know if that's true, but what is true about this one is they did drop it against this guy, but there was, I think, 2 or 3 or 4 other people that were caught up in this same company, and they pled guilty, and they're in prison. And this guy, I don't know exactly what his, sort of rank status, ownership interest was, but he was a big player, and I got the impression that he was kind of over the whole thing, and which is kind of head-scratching. Now, there's a lot of accusations that are, and this is the downside of BehindMLM.com, is the authors are leftward leaning, and so if they can make a connection between somebody and a conservative, particularly Trump, they will milk it, and that's what they're doing. They're claiming that this Goetsch guy paid off Trump, and therefore he's being let loose, and there's not going to be anything further done with this, and that's the end of the story. Now, they have no evidence for that other than he was involved in crypto and Trump is involved in crypto, but there's no proof. It is a head-scratcher, I must say, because if there was other convictions and guilty pleas from other people in the same company, you would think this would be a slam dunk for the DOJ, particularly if these other people were willing to testify against this guy, which I think a lot of them, if not all of them, would be, particularly if they can get their sentence shortened. I mean, that's a no-brainer. So yeah, this one really is curious, but we really don't know what happened here. And Behind MLM pretty much makes the conclusion that they know what happened, but they don't. It's just.
Well, there's a couple of possibilities. Yeah, yep. There's a couple of possibilities. Yeah, more than less likely. Here's what I know: the Department of Justice doesn't always do things the right way. So if they were found that they were doing things the wrong way, and it was going to get their case thrown out, they're going to drop it. So it could be something like manipulation of evidence. It could have been maybe they did something wrong during the investigation that they knew would wind up embarrassing them when brought to trial. That's one of the biggest reasons why they would drop a case. I can't imagine it being that they're letting him go. So, meaning, with as many people who have pled guilty for as long as they went after him, and I don't remember the details in the back of my mind now, but I remember as I was researching both BitConnect and BitClub, that this guy was basically, they nailed him. I mean, it was just something they nailed him on. And there's something that probably happened where they dropped the case. Maybe he's decided that he's going to testify against some other people in some other cases. I don't know. But I don't think it's like they were going against an innocent man. I think they dropped the case because they probably wanted to or had to. And maybe there was nothing else. Maybe there was no other resources or assets they can go after him, so it was a dead deal. So I don't know, because we're talking about, now Scott, was this BitConnect or BitClub?
This was BitClub.
Okay, so that's got to be probably pretty close to a dozen years old or 10 years old. So it could be any of the reasons that I just mentioned. No, although we don't know. I'm just giving you the highest probability of some of the reasons why they would have dropped the case against him.
Yeah, I mean,
I was going to be curious.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No. What's curious is whether the people that pleaded guilty are now going to try to get their guilty plea reversed, because they might say, we only pled guilty because of whatever. We thought this guy was going to go to jail, and we figured we'd plead guilty so we get lighter sentencing. And now that they're dropping the case, maybe we're going to reverse our appeal, which is, by the way, almost impossible to do. And there's a guy named Joby Weeks who's trying to do that as well. So I don't know. We'll see what's going on.
Yeah, I doubt they'll be successful with that.
No,
now it does have an article in here where it links to another story where this Getch guy says that Trump was his chief client. So again, just because he was the chief client, whether he was or not, it doesn't mean anything as far as his behavior, this Getch guy. So, people are just trying to connect these things, and particularly people who hate Trump, they say, oh, yeah, that's it. That's definitely what's going on here. So, I mean, behind MLM might be right. I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying, it's not a solid case. There's some circumstantial facts, but to draw a conclusion without knowing more is really, to me, it's just not a very smart thing to do. But that's what behind MLM does a lot of, is they'll try to take these little, threads of commonality and think that they can paint the entire picture and come to a conclusion, and you really can't. So anyway.
Right. Well, I mean, realistically speaking, the Epstein files aren't released. Why? Because they're probably tied to people with the high places. Epstein didn't go to jail initially. Why? Because he was part of the, super intelligence places. So, people are sometimes told to stand down. And maybe this got to the place where it had some far-reaching things, and maybe there was the government said to stand down. So they did, and that's another possibility. So I don't know that much about the case, but it's very interesting and very rare, like they are saying, for somebody to drop a case once it gets started. Because here's what happens. All of the federal agencies, they don't pick cases they're planning on losing. The stuff that they pick, they're planning on winning. So when they lose or they drop it, it's really exceptional. So that's like when the Aurora won against the government, with the Supreme Court ruling. That was really an exception because the government, I'm sure, considered it like a slam dunk. So back to you, Scott.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting, and I don't think we're going to learn much more about it. I don't think there's going to be much more that comes out as far as why the DOJ dropped it. So, unless something happens, which I don't expect, it's just going to be a question mark. And that's part of life. You don't always get to the bottom line. So, and like you say, Epstein was given a sweetheart deal years ago, probably because he was doing some nefarious things with some three-lettered agencies, and he had some leverage. And so that kind of stuff goes on. If you don't think that it does, you need to wake up, because it happens.
Hey, could we cover something? Could we cover something that's related to Eric Worre and the Traders Domain Name Receivership and Herbalife? So do you want to cover it, or do you want me to talk about it a little bit?
Go ahead. I think you might be more familiar with it.
Okay. So people are familiar with Eric Worre. You either love him or you hate him. If you didn't know who Eric Worre was, if you were in an MLM and your upline had nothing else to do because they didn't have any talent, they usually asked you to go to an Eric Worre event. So no self-respecting sales company or company would need an Eric Worre, because your own distributors probably could do a better training about your company. But for whatever reason, Eric Worre saw the spot to be able to go grab, the grand poobah, if you will, or master trainer of the network marketing industry. And just like Robert Fitzpatrick grabbed I'm the anti-MLM guru, Eric Worre basically became, through his own hard work, got to give him credit, the master, if you will, of GoPro, Networking Pro, a few other organizations that he ran, and basically the grand poobah of the MLM industry, much to the demise, if you will, of Garrett McGrath, who's running the ANMP, who always wanted to be that person but never could pull it off. Well, Eric, during the pandemic, this is a probably would have never happened if it wasn't for COVID conversation. If you remember, COVID shut everybody down. So if you ran an event-driven business, you were screwed, because you can't get people to go into your coliseum or your stadium, your auditorium, or wherever you bring them, because they couldn't fly and they weren't traveling and they had to wear masks. And if your business is driven by seminars, you were screwed. So Eric Worre had to go out there and figure out what he was going to do, and made a couple of really bad choices. One of them, he was going to be the trainer for Omega Pro. And you'd say, Omega Pro, this guy says he knows how to pre-screen companies to find the good ones, and he's working with Omega Pro? Oh, my God. He must really desperately need the money. So he desperately needed the money, and probably in that scam wound up recruiting a whole bunch of people from his GoPro days and the people that was part of his inner circle that kind of like followed him, because that's what you do with a mentor, whether right one or wrong one. And he brought a lot of people into Omega Pro. People didn't really realize that Omega Pro was using the platform developed by Traders Domain. And this is not technically 100% factually true, but just for those people that don't need all the boring details. So Omega Pro was tied into what was going on with Traders Domain, and Traders Domain wound up getting shut down. And there was a receiver appointed to Traders Domain. What was really surprising is this was not a secret. Like, everybody knew this was going on, at least everybody that should have known. And yet, Herbalife hired Eric Worre to be one of their corporate trainers, or the corporate trainer. Like, this is the guy that's going to bring us back to double digits, because after Carl Icahn dropped Herbalife stock and the Bill Ackman thing was going back and forth with, we're not going to let the stock go low, we got to get the stock high. After that drama was over and Bill Ackman walked away and Carl Icahn walked away, Herbalife stock tanked. I mean, it went not to zero, but it went down a lot. So Herbalife Corporation wound up needing someone, probably from the outside, to bring in a lot more people into Herbalife, like recruit the world. Who can we get to do that? Go to the master trainer distributor, the guy that's got a lot of people in his sphere, and make him the corporate trainer. And guess what? They follow them over here. They'll probably follow them over here. So that was what Herbalife banked on, gave them a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract. But why did they do that? Like, why would you do that? Like, how desperate do you need to be to work with the guy that you know was going to be in a headline for a scam? But Herbalife did it anyway. So what's very curious is, what's the bottom line? If you go through behind MLM, you'll see that people from Omega Pro have had clawbacks from the receiver, like a lot of them, by the hundreds already. People, if you go look at other places, you'll see that Eric Worre has to pay back over $1 million to the receiver, and he's doing it on installments, which is kind of curious for a guy that makes millions of dollars every year, allegedly. That's where I'll throw in allegedly. But so Eric Worre's got to pay back over $1 million and blemish the reputation of himself, his wife, his family, and yet Herbalife has got to make a decision probably at the end of 2026 or the beginning of 2027. What do we do with this contract? Do we renew it? Do we not? And here's my prediction. And by the way, this is on a deep dive on Building Fortunes Radio. So if you go to buildingfortunesradio.com/deep dive, or you look for the deep dive link, you'll be able to hear the deep dive review about this Eric Worre thing. Well, Herbalife really has had a lackluster rebound. Really next to nothing. Very small as far as sales growth. A little teeny-weeny bit as far as their attendance. Next to nothing as far as their real growth. And the promises that Eric Worre probably made or was definitely assumed in a contract, whereas have double-digit growth on their stock price, did not happen. So what are they going to do with Eric Worre? Are they going to allow the legal issues to become, like I would have fired the guy right away. It's kind of like, don't they do that to corporate executives that get caught up in scandals? What about like the kissing couple, remember, at the Coldplay concert? Isn't that what they do to people that get caught up in scandals? Don't they just fire them more or less right away? Well, I predict, so here's my prediction, that Eric Worre does not deserve to have a contract renewed for a multi-year, probably $1 million contract. But he'll probably get it anyway, and the only reason why is because the guy who made the decision can't be wrong. That's going to tarnish his maybe position with the company. So he's got to back up and reinforce his bad decision. Michael Johnson, who I think was still running the company, he left for a little bit, and then he came back because the company was doing so bad. So Michael Johnson, who probably okayed the guy who made the decision about Eric Worre, he's going to say, give him a shot. Probably everybody else on the board who's like, oh, shit, we can't admit we made a mistake, is going to give him a shot. And it's a $5 billion a year company. So what is $2 or $3 or $4 or $5 million really mean to a publicly traded $5 billion company? And the answer is, I forget the number. I think the accurate number of the amount of outstanding stock in Herbalife is 103 million shares. So all the stock has to go up to afford Eric Worre is about 3 to 5 cents. So when you have 103 million shares, if they go up a blip a day, 3 to 5 cents, you can pay for Eric Worre and avoid all the mistakes. And because our industry doesn't call out Eric Worre, it's kind of like not making headlines. Whereas if the ANP called out Eric Worre, which they won't, if Troy Dooley called out Eric Worre, which he's not, if the other guys would call out Eric Worre, which they aren't, there's some kind of a blind spot or some kind of a loyalty towards this guy where no one's calling him out. And I am. I never liked the guy. I always thought he was a fraud based on the things that he does. He's not original at all, has nothing original, and he flip-flops and contradicts himself, and like all you have to do is, like, he's stupid enough to leave most of his videos up. All you have to do is watch a couple of videos from the olden days and watch a couple of videos from the newer ones. You'll see the guy is contradicting himself a million times, and it's not like he changed his mind or the industry changed. So if you go through it, you just say, you know what, Eric Worre is not necessarily good for this business. Now, some people might say, but I like to go for the concert goers, the community members, the people that just kind of get, little hard arms or woodies when they go into community events because they can meet other people. For the people that like the community, you might like the Eric Worre stuff, But for the reality, if you're in the expert guru speakers thing, you love the guy because you can crisscross and cross-pollinate your audience with their audience and all that sort of stuff. But is he good for business? I don't think so. But will he stay in business? I'm saying yes. And he's getting older now. So I think he's probably just needs another 3 years of a couple of million a year and not getting into more scandals so he doesn't have to pay it all back. And unless there's criminal charges somewhere circumventing or circulating around Traders Domain or Omega Pro, which I don't think there are at his level, he'll probably skate through this one and get past it. And that's all I have to say about Eric Worre. So, but I think the audience needs to hear it. because it's not being said anywhere else that I know of. So back to you, Scott. Oops, Scott, I think you might be on mute. Scott?
Can you hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you now. Yeah, you might have been
I was on mute. Yep, I was on mute. Yeah, it's really unfortunate. I was saying someone of his ilk can be so popular out there, and he's not being basically corrected by the MLM industry, which just reflects badly on the MLM industry as a whole. You know, you don't hear anything from the ANMP, like you said, you didn't expect it. You don't hear anything from the DSA, Direct Selling Association. You don't, and like you say, Peter, and I don't go looking for it, but I haven't seen anything from anybody in the MLM industry criticizing his behavior and pointing out, you know, for example, that $1 million settlement, fine, whatever it was. And he just goes on with life as it was before with no change, you know. It'll be interesting to see going forward if he's a little less cocky maybe. But I do remember, and this is years ago now, I think it was, I want to say in the late teens, I'm pretty sure it was before COVID, where he was really, I would say he was not very optimistic or confident in the future of the MLM industry. He was really concerned about it. But then something changed, and I think to your point, maybe it was COVID, and when he bought that, what is it, $20 million studio, you know, I guess it has like big, you know, audio visual stuff and, you know, some seating for, I don't know, a couple hundred people, something like that. You know, it's a big production basically that he spent a lot of money on because of COVID. You know, that way you could still sort of have that environment without the big conference hall or whatever, big stadium. So, you know, from that standpoint, it was a smart way to go. But it's interesting how his sort of attitude and his confidence has increased over the years, and he's got nothing really factual which should be pushing him in that direction, except that he's making money for himself. That's really the only thing he has going for him, because, I mean, the reputation of the MLM industry, from what I've seen, has only gotten worse as time has gone on, and most of it's very well deserved. But it's also a fact that the industry doesn't police itself. They claim to, but they really don't. Was it DSSRC, which was a entity kind of set up? It's got 1 foot in the Better Business Bureau and 1 foot in the DSA, and they go out and find the worst of the worst, you know, people that are acting up, and then they claim that they're self-regulating. But if you look at the cases, you know, if you know what's going on in the industry like we do, you keep up on what's going on, you can see that, no, there's lots of companies that do pretty much the same thing. It's just that maybe this is a newer company or a smaller company or a company that, you know, just doesn't have the influence. And so those are the ones they go after. But you'll never see, I don't believe, the DSSRC go after Amway for their tool scam. It's just not going to happen. Or even their retail sales. You know, thanks but no thanks to the FTC for not making that a major issue. And so, you know, the DSSRC has an excuse not to go after lack of retail sales, because it's nothing that the FTC is really focused on, even though, you know, they say it's necessary, but they refuse to sort of quantify it, which doesn't do you much good. If you can't quantify something, then it's very nebulous. So anyway, that's about all I've got to say on all that. Did you have anything more you wanted to cover tonight?
Nope, that was good stuff. Oh,
yeah,
only one thing, just as a little mention. I don't remember if we mentioned it last week, but the MLM conference videos are up. So I don't know if you want to cover that real quick.
Yes, they are up. If you go to MLMconference.com, and that's all one word, MLMconference.com, you can see the videos from this past May, and it's a 2-day, all day, sessions with different themes, and it's the usual suspects. They won't invite me or you because they're these hardcore anti-MLMers, and they don't want to know the facts because they already made up their mind. So, that's what you have to let them do, and so it's largely non-productive. There are a few nuggets in there, but they're few and far between. Most of it's just academia, anti-MLMers, people that are walking around the issues without taking them head on, including quote unquote respected organizations like Tina.org. I know I brought up an issue during the conference. You can type in questions that they either choose or choose not to bring up during the conference. And there was one point where, they were talking about this particular situation, and I made the comment that if this is as common as Tina.org was saying, that the FTC should have lots more lawsuits than they have. And of course, that comment did not get read on the show. So people watching the videos are not going to have a clue about that. But the question was asked, and then they ignored it. And that's just typical of what they do. They pick and choose the questions they want to address, and then they ignore the ones they don't want to address. But that's just part of the game that they're playing. And I haven't found any of them that are willing, for example, to come on this show, or I'll go on their show, whatever, of interacting with me and having a conversation. They won't do it because, again, they've already made up their minds. But you can get some good information from MLMconference.com, which is actually an anti-MLM conference, just so you don't misunderstand it. But it's not worded in that way. They bought that name from somebody else, I guess, probably pennies on the dollar, and made it their own. So, and let me mention the information that I have put together, Peter, over the years. I've kind of coalesced it around my Facebook page. My Facebook page has a number of links to websites and videos and YouTube channel and all these different things. My input to the FTC in 2022 for what they are interested in, product claims and income claims, is right there at the top, pinned story. I believe it's the best input that the FTC got, and I haven't looked at all 1,600 plus submittals, but I did, sort of sample some of them, look at some of the usual suspects, and every single one of them that I looked at, it missed the mark substantially. So, however, the FTC didn't even mention me in their proposed new guidelines that came out, I guess, a couple years ago now. So it's just that's the conundrum that we're in. There's people with their agendas, and they will not address the facts. So here's where you go to find the information: is facebook.com/Stop The Amway Tool Scam. That's all one word: Stop The Amway Tool Scam, and that's where you'll find tons of factual information. And I've always said, Peter, we don't have to make stuff up, exaggerate stuff, take stuff out of context. We don't have to do any of that. We can just lay the facts out as they are, and it's shocking enough. You don't need to try to make up stuff because the reality is actually more fantastic than anything you can make up. So anyway, Peter, another good week. Happy August. We're like you saying. I mean, we're in about a month of our 11th year anniversary here. So
that's crazy.
We're getting there. We're getting there. And thank you for doing the show for almost 11 years. And we'll talk again next Saturday.
That's it. We'll see everybody next time. So make sure you go check it out. You'll see it on buildingfortunesradio.com. You look for the Scott Johnson Radio Show, and we'll catch everybody next time.
Wow. You've been listening to the Scott Johnson Radio Show on Building Fortunes Radio and the Humongous Radio Network. If you want to listen to this again or tune in to the other radio shows, you'll be able to hear the Scott Johnson Radio Show on the Humongous AM and Humongous FM radio network, and on all major platforms, such as Amazon's Audible and Apple Podcasts, Spotify and iHeartRadio, and on many of your favorite podcasts. Scott, Peter, and I are glad you listened in. Always. Stupid Marco Mukaiber probably listened in too, but since he's being sued by Primerica, and because he's a socially manipulating online troll with a diminishing YouTube subscriber base, he's on listen-only mode here on the Scott Johnson Radio Show. Share this show with the people that are important to you. Thanks again for listening in, and go make the world a better place.